We have time. Forgive me, everybody. We could have listened to Dan for the rest of the afternoon, right? Thank you so much, everybody on the panel, and especially our special guest. We have time for just a couple of questions while you're putting your hands up. Paul, I know, want to announce a special event that's happening this week in London that has to do with creating the consciousness and the conscience that Dan's talking about. Paul, you want to just tell us what it is?
Okay. Briefly, there's a number of families coming over. We're doing an event at the bottom of Downing Street alongside the Ministry of Defence with shoes that families have donated who've lost loved ones. And it's some 150 pairs of shoes with notes in it from the families. And if you want to join us, we're there on Wednesday, which is International Human Rights Day, between 12 and 3 o'clock, directly opposite Downing Street. So you're more than welcome. Come and join us.
And is it true that the National Archive records are going digital sometime soon?
Some of them are. Some are. It's a lot of work.
And will that make a big difference for you?
Yes, it will.
And everybody who wants to follow up on this.
Yeah.
All right, couple of questions. Here, Duncan, and there. All right, I'm calling for a couple. All right, I'll leave it up to you, Catherine, but here and here. Go.
I have a question for Nicky. It's very practical in terms of source protection. You talk about not leaving traces from the start, but I guess the question I have is, when you get contacted by a source, a confidential source, how do you protect that initial contact when you go out and try and get in touch with people? And also, how do you educate sources who might not be technically able or very well versed to use encryption and other things?
All right, we're going to take 3 questions and then we're going to get a response. So here and Duncan. 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay.
I'll come back in the back after this one. Thank you. 3 here, 3 in the back.
My question is for Mr. Ellsberg. You spoke about the publication of documents and the importance of publishing the documents, and I was wondering how you viewed the difference between the approach of WikiLeaks, who publishes full documents, versus the Intercept that publishes only parts of the Snowden documents.
Third question.
It's Masato Kimura, Japanese freelance journalist. My question to Mr. Ellsberg, and so I would like to know why you could realize this policy was wrong and the document must be open. But on the other hand, why the policymaker, including the president, could not understand their policy was wrong?
I didn't get that.
All right. 3 questions. One about leaving traces, one about full documents versus partial, and one about why did an intelligence officer inside the RAND Corporation have a better conscience than the president. Nicky, Karen, you want to start? Did you want to, on the question of record tracking, tracing? Wasn't that your question?
Yeah, no, but not to me, Nicky.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was to Karen.
Well, it's a huge topic which I won't do in depth. Most sources don't approach you. And in my work, the vast majority of good sources are ones which I have found, tracked down, and approached myself. But if someone approaches you and they approach you badly, that may have already mucked it up. And so you can't tell how someone's going to approach you. But normally what goes on is I might have somebody who I want to approach. It might be a senior official or something. And I will sweat about it for ages thinking, should I turn up at their house? Will that compromise them at home? I had one case where I had a very good source, so I just had an instinct would be prepared to talk, or potential source, I had an instinct would be prepared to talk to me. In the end, I decided that my best bet was to guess that it was the kind of person who arrived home at a certain time of night and stood in the street until they got home. Because different situations for different people, but actually making sure that first approach is as safe and as effective as possible. The other reason why I stood in the street was because if I phone somebody, even from a careful phone, that gives a space and a mental space where all the person's training and fears can come into action before they meet me. And so I try very hard to meet face to face the first time so that the person can make a judgment about whether they want to trust me. Because people judge on all kinds of non-verbal things. And usually, if I approach the right way, in spite of people's fears and the fact that they're not expecting it, and if I've planned reasonably to choose the right sort of person, it's remarkable what proportion of the time it works.
Partial versus full documents. Dan? I think so, yeah.
Okay, first is I.
Where's the mic?
Oh, microphone, yeah. Hello?
It should come on.
Hello, can you hear me?
There you go.
Yeah, okay, good. By the way, I have to tell you, I got in late last night at 2 a.m. my time from Moscow, and I'm very aware that my brains are scrambled here. I'm not very jet-lagged, not thinking too clearly. By the way, I realized that I didn't really explain what my disagreement with Nick here was in one respect when I said I disagree with him. When he was saying, I could put it this way, don't tell anyone, to keep the secret. Well, if you're really trying very hard in the government to keep a secret, they say what it amounts to is don't tell anyone more than about 1,000 people, because don't tell the usual whole number of the NSA, 30,000, or the Pentagon and so forth. What I'm saying is there is a saying, if you want to keep a secret, 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. But that's the idea. It's actually a cover story for journalists, because it's the notion, you'll get it, you're doing well enough, you'll get it, eventually the secrets can't be kept. The point I wanted to make was, in the government, now you're dealing with people who get their jobs, but above all, keep their access and increase their access only because they have the characteristics of a con man or whatever it takes to really keep secrets very well. If you can't keep secrets, you don't get ahead, you don't keep the access and whatnot. I've just had the privilege of having many hours now of conversation with one of my heroes, Edward Snowden. I'm going to see another one here, Julian Assange. But he mentioned that his ability to get the kind of material he had was based on this extraordinary PRIVAC, privileged access clearance, which is has the effect, to simplify, of go anywhere, see anything, do anything. You can get into anything, because as a systems administrator, he could get into all these files despite all the clearances, which he didn't have officially, but he could have access to them. And so he explained this at great length. And finally I asked, how many people have that kind of clearance? About 1,000. 1,000? So 1,000 people could have put out what he did, but none of them did, in effect. Second point is, what I'm saying is those kinds of sources are extraordinarily rare who are willing to do it. People who understand now that the system is wrong. It wasn't me who understood that the Vietnam War was hopeless at that point, and then by reading the Pentagon Papers, I discovered that it had been illegitimate from the start in our support of French colonial reconquest of a country that had claimed its independence. Radicals had been saying that for years, but I didn't pay any attention to them. I had to read it in the top secret records, said exactly what the radicals said. Then I believed it, but it also meant they know that, meaning that it's been illegitimate from the start. How many people knew that? Hundreds, thousands. The truth is that secrets are not kept so much by technical means, although the secrecy process does have technical aspects to it, but it's mainly on their ability for these people who want to keep their important jobs, keep their careers, send their children to good colleges, but also to maintain their identity as loyal, trusted, reliable servants of the Queen, the King, the President. And what we have in America now is an elected monarchy, effectively, as a matter of fact, in terms of a ruler who feels no restraint whatever from the Constitution, treaties, domestic law, Congress, legislation, nothing. As Nixon put it, but Nixon had to resign, Nixon put it, when the president does it, it's not illegal. Barack Obama and all his successors are working on that principle right now. So that's why we need the investigative journalists, but we don't have them. Nick here, as I hear him and I know his record, is almost as exceptional among journalists as the massive whistleblower is among officials. The truth is, we talk about a field of investigative journalists, but I'm sure there's a lot of people here who know the number of real digging investigative journalists, especially in the national security field, where there is a threat of prosecution, because of the classified aspect, the number is very small. People who really dig, and we need a lot more. So on your point, you were saying, what was it now, the difference between WikiLeaks,
Partial
say,
versus
puts out all the
complete.
documents. Yeah, the WikiLeaks, Julian Assange really put himself open to the charge of, with the Afghan war logs, when he put them out, by putting them all out instead of at once, as soon as some of the newspapers began to print some of it. He opened himself to the charge with, you couldn't have read all this. This was Adrian Lamo's point. Nobody could have read all this stuff. How do you know, that some of it is not serious? And the charge that you were risking informants' lives and names, not enough redaction, and so forth. And so you have an extreme here, putting out 100,000 things. And frankly, I'm very relieved that we didn't see a headless body on the cover of Time at some point that was due to Julian Assange. That would not have been surprising, and that would have been the end of that process, pretty much. As it worked out, with all the discussion of blood on your hands that were told right from the beginning, not one single case of physical harm has been shown, including in Chelsea Manning's trial. They weren't even in the secret sessions able to bring one example of somebody who'd been harmed. That was actually somewhat surprising, but to me, I would say. But it also reflected what Chelsea's judgment had been, that at this level, it couldn't be that harmful. This is such a low level of classification. Now, go to the other stuff. The other extreme is my stuff was top secret. All of Snowden's stuff is communications intelligence. It's at a higher level than top secret. Again, he was very careful to go to the other extreme, and he has not revealed anything directly. Remember that all these people could have put it all on the web initially, and chose not to do it. I think there's, for various reasons, it has worked out to do it more sequentially. And I think that by this time, a year having gone by, one can well question whether the First Look and the Guardian and the Washington Post, whether it isn't held a little more tightly than it might be. Some way of sharing it, getting more out, these are the two extremes. But I did think that Julian's treatment of the Iraq war logs, and I came here to London to help introduce the bringing out the Iraq war logs. And in that case, his policy, and with his Cablegate, was to put out pretty much only documents that related to what news stories. The difference being that a judgment of an editorial staff and a news staff and people with experience had gone over that, and you were just basing their judgment of what the public should know against clappers. And between those two, there's really no choice. The fact is that these experienced, patriotic people have incredibly more responsible knowledge and expertise on what the public needs to know and should know than any member, anyone in the government.
Thanks.
So you have these two extremes, and they're not, it may be that the Snowden stuff is now coming out a bit slower than would be good. But on the other hand, to just dump it all out, I'll just go back to one thing. I'm told by Gar Elprovitz, a secret name, who was actually ran the management of distributing these papers while the FBI was looking for me for 13 days, and I would decide which papers to give it to and so forth. And he pretty much was in charge of getting it through to them. He's a historian who didn't want his name known for 40 years, but he has okayed me to use it just in the last year. It was later than my book, Secrets. I wanted to put his story in the book. He didn't want it in yet.
60
No one
seconds,
who
Dan.
helped me wanted their name yet after 40 years. But he reminds me, and I didn't even remember it, that once there was one injunction, he said my instinct was to get it all out, to put it all out some way. And I didn't have the web then to do it. I even considered the Harvard Crimson printing press at one point.
60 seconds, Dan.
But he said, no, do it sequentially, have one paper after another. That was crucial to the way. So again, to put it all out at once is not the best way either. But the documents in either case, whether they're slower, keeping in mind that they were all too late, they were all 3 years late then at that point. It wasn't what would have happened years earlier. But I say get them out early, and the point is when you're looking for people, this is the way it has to be done. And just knowing, and Nick said to me, he agreed with me, knowing that when they say, the government says always, the president or the prime minister, whoever, everyone who knows the classified information, all my advisors agree that this policy may not be perfect, but it's better than any other. There is no alternative. This is the way to do it, and so forth. That is always, invariably a lie. There are always people inside who know the data, who disagree with that policy for good reasons or bad. And if a policy looks crazy to the outsider, it probably is crazy.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
There are many people inside who can see just as you can see how criminal, crazy, hopeless it is.
Dan,
if you can find them. And
we love
you
you.
have to go find them.
And they have to eat. Thank you. Dan Ellsberg and Cadwallader, School of Governor, Nicky Hager, Clarence Bank.